Ishiro Honda once said that the tragedy of monsters is the fact that they are born too tall, too strong, and too heavy. And at least in the context of the films, he was right. These attributes have led to Godzilla having many disagreements with the Japanese military. But at least in the context of pop culture, these attributes have led to the opposite for Godzilla. They've allowed him to prosper and produce 28 movies. But I want to analyze this and discover what it truly is about Godzilla that attracts people to him and why he's been so endearing. And the only way to truly do that successfully is to review every Godzilla movie ever made. Some people might be angry, but regardless, welcome to Zazubaar's Godzilla Palooza. Greetings, Exilian Invasion Force. I am Zazubaar, and welcome back to Godzilla Palooza. It's day 30, and today we officially end the Godzilla franchise with the last day of Godzilla Palooza and the 2004 film, Godzilla Final Wars. It's been one hell of a ride, but it's finally time to conclude this huge romp through all of the Godzilla films with the true bang-up explosion of entertainment conclusion to the franchise in the form of Godzilla Final Wars. Godzilla Final Wars had a huge budget and is basically a remake of Destroy All Monsters, and actually succeeds in what Destroy All Monsters set out to do, in that film too was supposed to end the Godzilla franchise, and Godzilla Final Wars actually does that. Well, at least for now. More on that later. So it's not surprising that it is a huge it's a huge ball of awesomeness, and that's really all I can describe it as. And it's very hard to describe Godzilla Final Wars because you really kind of have to be a Godzilla fan to understand it and appreciate it. It's not Godzilla vs. Destroya, where that film is kind of an embodiment and a good conclusion to the Godzilla character. Godzilla Final Wars is actually, in retrospective, not that much about Godzilla, and that's one of the problems with it, but what's great about Godzilla Final Wars is that it manages to completely and beautifully and pay tribute to not only Godzilla's legacy, but to the Toho sci-fi legacy, though mainly Godzilla since this is his film, though that is, again, one of my problems with it. And it is absolutely beautiful in that regard. Every frame is either a reference or just a great nod or an homage or just a great conclusion to some Godzilla idea, character, monster, piece of equipment, anything, Godzilla actor even. And every frame is filled with that, and the film is beautiful at paying tribute to the legacy of Godzilla and concluding it, and giving his fans one last romp in this universe. As a remake of Destroy All Monsters, it's a little different because Destroy All Monsters was not really a Godzilla movie. Godzilla was in it, and he was kind of the main monster, but it wasn't really his story. That film was more to end Toho's sci-fi stuff in general. Now really all that's left of that is the Godzilla franchise, so that's what this film is ending. Though if Toho's sci-fi franchise was still going on, I suppose that this would end that as well, because a lot of sci-fi non-Godzilla related elements are incorporated into this as well, like the main weapon of the film, Gotengo, being the weapon in the original film, Atragon. So that's really what Godzilla Final Wars is, and for the most part it's very successful at doing what it sets out to do. I do have my qualms with it, but otherwise this movie is just amazing as a love letter to Godzilla. It's just, again, every frame is filled with some nod or reference. It's just incredible. And that's really what the story serves to do. It sets out to pay tribute to the legacy of Godzilla, and also to have a bunch of epic action sequences that would fit in the end of Godzilla. So the story itself, while complex and intricate, does not have much of a thematic twist to it like I usually prefer my Godzilla movies to have. This is potentially the only film, maybe with Destroy All Monsters even, though that kind of comes hand in hand, that a theme would bog it down. There are elements of this film that hint at some sort of theme, but that's not really the point of Godzilla Final Wars. It's mainly there to be an ungodly level of entertaining to Godzilla fans and to moviegoers who are familiar with the character and legacy of Godzilla. And in that regard, it is extremely successful and amazing to watch. I feel like I'm going to keep talking in circles unless I actually get into the film, mainly the story. So, the last thing I want to say is that Godzilla Final Wars, because Toho wanted it to be the end, they gave the film a humongous budget, unparalleled in the history of Godzilla, and the video quality and the quality and modernization of the effects, very telling of that. This movie holds up well and looks very impressive even today. In terms of just the elaborate aspects of the sets, the elaborate aspects of the video quality, it's just an all-around beautiful production and an epic production, and that's mainly because of the humongous budget and the fact that the production team didn't waste it. They used it in every way that they could, and the film looks amazing for it. And it's unfortunate, though, that they gave it a huge budget. I think this is, in fact, the most expensive Godzilla movie ever made. I could be wrong on that, but I'm remembering reading somewhere that it was up there. It's up there, at least, but I think it is, in fact, the most expensive Godzilla film ever made. So it's very, very disappointing that it's the second lowest grossing Godzilla film of all time, right next to Terror of Mechagodzilla. And ain't that just ironic that the two great Godzilla movies that are both on my top 10 favorite Godzilla film list, both were kind of sort of bombs at the box office? I mean, isn't that just terrible? It's kind of easy to see why, though, especially with Godzilla Final Wars. Terror of Mechagodzilla was an economic reason. Godzilla Final Wars is a story reason. The problem is that this film is has a very specific demographic it's going to entertain to. It's kind of like Godzilla Final Wars is kind of like the Turtles Forever of Godzilla movies. Now, for those of you who don't know what Turtles Forever is a TMNT anniversary film that came out in 2009, which was celebrating the long-running history of the Ninja Turtles, and that film was paying tribute to nearly every aspect of that franchise. And in that film, you don't want to watch that if you're not a Turtles fan. Same thing with Godzilla Final Wars. And the thing is that they released this movie in theaters and expected a big turnout when they're going for a very, very specific demographic, and quite frankly, a demographic that was falling out of popularity. So, I'm not surprised that this film bombed in the way it did. I am ultimately disappointed because I think it's a great and entertaining movie. And I think there are aspects of the film that definitely do work for a wider demographic than just Godzilla fans, mainly the human action scenes and the quite well done sci-fi story. But the sheer level of Godzilla tribute is just too high for this to be a film that's going to entertain a mainstream demographic. It's mainly for Godzilla fans. So I think that's kind of sort of why it was such a big bomb in Japan, and why the film is really, really popular amongst Godzilla fans, you know, in video release. But with all that out of the way, again, I think if I don't get into the plot, I'm going to keep talking in circles, so let's get into the plot of Godzilla Final Wars. So what can the good people at Toho cook up to complete the Godzilla franchise? Well, again, it's very much so a remake of Destroy All Monsters, though not an exact one. Basically what happens is, like Destroy All Monsters, this film as well is set in the future, and, well, seemingly, we're not told that, but we can gather just from the, you know, from the technology and the way the world looks at it's the future, particularly in the clothing, and the fact that, the entire, kind of like in Destroy All Monsters, all the nations of the world have decided to come together into one world conglomerate, you know, the United Nations, though in this film it's called the Earth Defense Forces. But in this film I like the reason why. It's stated in the film that the reason why this happened was because there were too many giant monsters for humans to continue to make war amongst themselves. That because of that, because of humans making war amongst themselves and creating newer and newer weapons of mass destruction to complete this, more and more giant monsters kept being born, and they eventually just had to throw up their arms and say, we can't fight anymore, let's all join together and fight these giant monsters. And that's why we have the Earth Defense Forces, and why later on we have the M Organization. The M Organization is an entire military cooperation of mutant humans who are found all over the planet with a specific aspect of their DNA that gives them powers and physical abilities that are beyond any other human capability. Our main protagonist is a mutant human named Ozaki. The rest of the plot goes like this. Randomly a bunch of monsters attack the world. A bunch of them, like at least 15 or 16. They appear in cities all over the world. And strangely enough, though, as the EDF is continuing to battle them, and the M Organization in particular, they all disappear and are eliminated by a group of extraterrestrials called the Exilians. The Exilians have come to planet Earth in seemingly reasons of friendship, that they want to make friends with the Earth. However, it turns out that they've been they're filled with duplicity in that they turn on man and reveal that they have infiltrated the Earthling leaders and replaced a good chunk of their leaders, including the leader of basically the world, the Secretary General, played by Akira Takarada, Booyah, by replacing them with Exilians and seemingly attempting to take over the world from the inside. Again, seemingly. There's a confusing plot point where it seems like that's not the case, where the elderly Exilian, whose name escapes me, but he's basically the leader of the Exilians, says that he still wants friendship, but he had to infiltrate the world's leaders for some reason that he doesn't get to explain, because his underling, who I don't think is named in the film, but basically the new Exilian leader, blows his brains out and says that now they're gonna take over and that he's in charge and that they're gonna use all their power to destroy the Earth and basically farm the Earthlings like cattle. Here's a plot hole. It seems that the elderly Exilian leader is being sincere in his reasons of friendship. He's just going about it wrong. He says to this kid, he who uses his own power that power will be used against him, and that a peaceful settlement is more often more desirable. Given what the kid says for their reasons of coming to Earth, that they need to survive on mitochondria found in human blood cells, how is that a friendly, peaceful settlement? Basically, this kid is saying, we came here in the first place to farm you like animals. So, then what the hell is the point of this guy, of this elderly Exilian, saying that they want a peaceful settlement? I don't understand. And all I would need is a change in plans. I would like a clear distinction between the elderly Exilian's plans and the kid Exilian's plans, and that's not distinguished. But basically what happens is the kid Exilian reveals all, well, I call him the kid, he's, you know, about 25 years old, but younger than the elderly Exilian. He releases all the monsters that are under their control back on Earth's cities and continues to decimate the world and launches an entire invasion fleet to wipe out the entire human civilization. The Earthlings come up with a plan to wake up Godzilla, who has been frozen in ice for about 20 years after the captain of the Gotengo, named Captain Gordon, buried him in ice 20 years ago and wants to wake him up to combat all the monsters and take down the Exilians. Despite some trials and tribulations with Gigan, they do manage to wake up Godzilla, and Godzilla goes on to fight all the monsters, while the Gotengo and its crew go off to battle the Exilians. The Gotengo moves up to the mothership and drills a hole right in its side and goes in to take down all the Exilians while Godzilla continues to fight all the monsters. In the meantime, the Exilian leader is watching Godzilla fight all the monsters and is continually getting pissed that Godzilla's killing all his monsters. He finally decides to just scream his head off and say, "Alright, fine. Then take this," and a meteorite crashes on Earth that reveals itself to be seemingly a new monster called Monster X. Monster X and Godzilla have one hell of a cool fight, very dynamic and filled with agile martial arts moves that are very uncommon in Godzilla fights, though somewhat cool. Well, very cool, but they're different and strange for giant monsters to do. In the meantime, Ozaki and the alien leader have their own martial arts fight, and there's a big fight underway between the Earthlings and the Exilians. After a long fight, Ozaki does in the end defeat the Exilian leader, and in the meantime, all the Earthlings who were held captive by the Exilians return to their ship, the Gotengo, and Ozaki follows behind them. The Exilians are defeated, but Godzilla still has to deal with Monster X. He seemingly defeated him, but then Monster X just begins to transform, and transforms into a familiar face. Well, somewhat familiar. He's kind of redesigned. He reveals himself to be Kaiser Ghidorah, the basically god of all Ghidorahs, and reveals himself to have 4 legs, 3 heads, and just is massive compared to Godzilla. Godzilla seems outdone by Kaiser Ghidorah, but thanks to an energy boost by the Gotengo, Godzilla manages to muster up enough energy to defeat Kaiser Ghidorah by using that oh-so-familiar red spiral breath from the Heisei series, which I really like that reference, since for the most part Godzilla Final Wars pays tribute to the Showa series. I really like that. That's that one reference to the Heisei series, because that's my favorite Godzilla series, and for the most part, Final Wars ignores the Heisei series, which, fair enough. I mean, it's difficult to pay tribute to something that's already paying tribute to something, but I still would have liked a few more nods, and I like that one. So Godzilla kills Kaiser Ghidorah, but since this is Godzilla, Godzilla still has to deal with the remaining humans. Godzilla is about to kill them since the Gotengo is basically destroyed. And then, who should come out of the dust but Minya? Minya blocks Godzilla's way so that way he can't kill the humans. And at the end of the film, Godzilla finally decides that there's no more need to destroy humanity anymore because there's nothing left to be destroyed. And that it's about time that he moves on from hatred and goes off to live in peace. Godzilla and his son return to the sea, and the human cast are left with the words by Ozaki, "This isn't the end. It's just a new beginning." Cue the dramatic Keith Emerson music. Godzilla and Minya return to the sea, and the film and the Godzilla franchise ends. Godzilla Final Wars, the story is mostly just there to set up action sequences and scenes of homage. There's not much original plot here. Most of it is either borrowed or expounded upon the plot of both Invasion of the Astro Monster and Destroy All Monsters. It's not really a problem since, again, this movie's main goal is to pay tribute to the legacy of Godzilla, and it's not necessarily a problem that the plot isn't original, and that it's not there for much other reason than to set up action sequences and homage, since this is just supposed to be an epic conclusion to the franchise. It's mostly quite good at that. Both the homage scenes and the action sequences are for the most part well integrated into the story and fit in well, except for one very draggy scene where Ozaki and Kazama battle at the beginning of the film in a training session, and it's a really, really draggy fight. That seems to be the director, who's the same guy who directed Versus, which we will be doing on ZGC this month. He seems to just be missing doing karate or martial arts flicks and has a very extended scene where the two fight. And it's cool looking, I guess, but it doesn't serve really any purpose in the story. Well, it kinda does, but I wish it was shorter. Basically, it serves the point to give us this somewhat rivalry slash friendship between Kazama and Ozaki. And it's welcome. I mean, I like the fact that the human cast is not two-dimensional, and that plot point is there to cement that. But the fight scene didn't have to be that long. It's a good 5-minute long fight. It could have easily been 2 minutes. And, it's scenes like that slow the story down. For the most part, it is well-paced. The action and the homage builds up the story, and the sci-fi story itself is quite well told and quite foreboding. And there's a good build-up to all the reveals about the Exilians, and the plot twists are just that. They are plot twists, and you can't really see them coming from a million miles away, at least at first. Like with the reveal of the Secretary General being an Exilian, that one definitely comes a little bit out of left field. Though, to come up with a name as stupid as the Space Nations, I suppose you would have to be an alien to come up with that. Because I refuse to accept any character played by Akira Takarada would come up with a name that stupid. Excuse me. I just have to restrain the Akira Takarada fan in me. Anyway, so, where was I? So there are some parts of the story that do drag, and for the most part, it is well-paced, except for those draggy scenes, and for the most part, the plot twists are successful in being plot twists. Though the scene where the younger Exilian blows the shit out of the older one, I was like, whoa, why? And it was pretty. That was a pretty good plot twist as well. But they start to get a little stale after that. But overall, the sci-fi story is quite well told. It's quite a good alien invasion plot. Again, quite similar to Destroy All Monsters, and somewhat Invasion of the Astro Monster, though mainly it's just the name of the aliens that's from Invasion of the Astro Monster. And also the fact that Ghidorah is their trump card. And their look, of course, because the look of their their armor is very much so the people of the Planet X from Invasion of the Astro Monster. Now I finally get to call them Exilians, so I really like that. I like that visual aesthetic, and for the most part, they too are a great tribute, and the sci-fi story in and of itself is quite well told. My biggest complaint with the story is Godzilla's place in it. This is basically every person I've ever spoken to's big problem with Godzilla Final Wars, and that's the fact that Godzilla has very little to do with the overarching narrative. Basically, here's how he plays into the story. At the beginning of the film, he's locked in ice by the Earth Defense Forces. At the middle of the film, he's woken up by the Earth Defense Forces and is basically used as a big gun to destroy all the monsters and basically defeat the Exilians, though mostly the destruction of the Exilians comes at the hands of Ozaki. I just don't like that. I was never okay with Godzilla just being a big gun, and I'm not making an exception for Final Wars just because it's badass. Well, though it is badass, I'm not going to make an exception for it. I never liked the idea of Godzilla simply being a big gun. It's not as bad in this movie only because he's extremely badass, and there is a decent and very in-character reason for Godzilla to be used as a big gun, and what I mean by that is that the Gotengo is the thing that locked him in the ice all those years ago, and that it does make some kind of sense that he would follow the Gotengo around wherever he needed to be. So it makes sense, but I still resist the idea of Godzilla being used as a big gun. So yeah, it's not bad. Well, it is bad, but it's not terrible and makes the film unwatchable, so I can get past him being a big gun, but it is a big weak link in the story, and is especially disappointing since this is supposed to be the end of the Godzilla franchise. So, if this is the end of the franchise, I like there to be more of a focus on Godzilla as a character, like we have with Godzilla vs. Destroya. And it didn't have to be the same thing. Godzilla didn't have to die, but he could have he could have had a bigger place in the story. So I don't love it for that, and that he does feel like a big gun and doesn't have much of a place in the story. And at the end of the day, he kind of comes off as a secondary character to the human cast, in that they have way more screen time than he does, which I don't love as well. Again, especially since he's, you know, this is his last movie. So I wish that the story was more focused on him, and he played a bigger role in it. So Final Wars is definitely disappointing for that, though it doesn't ruin the movie. I want to talk about continuity briefly, because I've been talking with the Millennium series, I've been talking about the new universes, so to speak. For every other installment, it's been very clear about which Godzilla universe, or setting up a new Godzilla universe, those films take place in. Except for Godzilla 2000. And really, in all honesty, Godzilla Final Wars could very easily take place in the same universe as Godzilla 2000. I don't think it does, only because the universe is quite different. But aside from that, though, I suppose it doesn't really matter. I suppose the idea we can get is that basically the only told Godzilla story that's happened in this universe is the original Gojira, because it's mentioned, and we because it's mentioned, and then of course this one, and that he's been attacking regularly ever since then, and you know, until he gets frozen in ice. And obviously, given the opening credits and the fact that a lot of the monsters are brought up, basically every single Showa series Toho sci-fi film happened. Again, except for the Godzilla films in the Showa series, you know, everything else happened. The only problem is that in the opening reels of the film, we get a montage of all the monsters that have attacked in the past. And the problem is that some of them are from Godzilla movies, like Titanosaurus is shown, and Mechagodzilla is shown, and Megaguirus is shown. So, unless they didn't fight Godzilla in their appearances, which I'll accept that, though I would like it to be said, again, I suppose it's not a big deal, but whatever, that is somewhat problematic and leads to a confusing Godzilla continuity. Again, I suppose it doesn't really matter, because this film is mostly encapsulating every single Godzilla thing ever. So, I suppose if it ever happened in Godzilla, it's happened in Godzilla Final Wars, so, or at least in that universe, so I'll accept that. I like my continuities to make more sense than that, since there is no way you can canonicize every event in Godzilla history ever. Though, I suppose we can just assume that somehow everything in Godzilla that has ever happened in the past has happened in this film. So I'll accept that. It's really not a big deal. But again, at the end of the day, I do like my Godzilla continuities to make some sort of sense. But again, it's not a huge problem. So let's get into the human cast a little bit. I don't want to talk too much about them, only because there's a lot of them. Again, kind of like Destroy All Monsters. And if I was going to talk about all of them, I would have a lot to say about each. So, I'm mainly going to sum them up like this. They're a large cast of badasses. Every single character has some badass quality about them. Ozaki's a fighter, Captain Gordon's awesome, the Secretary General's awesome, everyone is awesome. And for the most part, they're a lot of them are past Godzilla actors. Like, again, Akira Takarada's in this film, Kenji Sahara's in this film, though he has a very small role compared to Akira Takarada's. But for the most part, there is a wide range of past Godzilla actors. I really don't want to talk too much about each, because they're mostly there to either pay homage or be a badass. So I don't want to do too much analyzing, and I don't want to do too much digging, since they're mainly there to hit things, blow things up, and react to the monsters fighting. So I don't want to go into too much depth on each character. I like all of them. I think they're all badasses. I think there are interesting qualities about each one of them that makes them an interesting person to follow, and intrigues you about them to the point where they don't come off as flat. Like Ozaki, Ozaki being kind of a mutant, because the stereotype of a mutant in the Godzilla Final Wars universe is that they're these cold-hearted killers who don't have any conscience, and it's very clear that Ozaki does, because he could have paralyzed Kazama in the first scene they have together when they're training. I mean, it's kind of common sense that he wouldn't do it, but Kazama almost does it to him. So, Ozaki's restraint shows that while he is a good fighter, and a strong one, being a good fighter isn't all you need to be a good soldier. And Ozaki's quite interesting for that, and is a great Godzilla protagonist. He's probably in my top 10, and one who's fun to follow. The only other one I want to, well, two, is I want to talk about Don Frye, and I want to talk about Akira Takarada. Don Frye plays Captain Gordon, and Don Frye is a American professional wrestler, and has appeared in several films after Godzilla Final Wars, and is overall a badass. His character, while simply being a no-nonsense badass who you would not want to fuck with, he's also quite interesting in that he has kind of a connection to Godzilla in that he's the guy who locked him away 20 years ago, and he wants to wake him up now. Despite being a character who would clearly hate Godzilla, he seems to have both a profound respect for him and an understanding of him. Like, he knows that Godzilla can be really destructive, but he's kind of cool with that. And he seemingly changed a little bit over the years because he's kind of destructive himself. I mean, he nearly kills his entire crew in the opening scene of the film where he's fighting Manda in the Gotengo. And he doesn't seem to care about superiority with his superior officers when he seemingly punches the leader of the M organization. Well, it's not shown, but at one point, the leader of the M organization says that he's in a holding cell for striking a superior officer, and maybe they're talking verbally, which we do see, but striking sounds physical to me, so I'm assuming he hit her. So he's kind of a destructive badass, but he doesn't really care, and I suppose he sympathizes with Godzilla on that level. But overall, who fucking cares? It's Don Frye, he's a badass, and really just serves to be there to say awesome lines like, "This operation will be called Operation Final War." And also lines like, "Godzilla is the most destructive weapon on the planet." So, I mean, overall, he's just there to be a badass, and in that regard, he succeeds with flying colors. So, I absolutely love Don Frye in this movie. He's a badass. And again, that's kind of how I can sum up the entire cast as all being likable badasses with some interesting background that makes them interesting to follow and keeps them from being flat. Not that those aspects are developed, but it's not a problem in Godzilla Final Wars, because that's not what the movie's trying to do. It's trying to have these people drive the narrative and be there to hit things, blow stuff up, comment on the monsters, and just be badasses. So I don't need those things to be developed because they're just there to make them interesting people to follow, and in that regard, it succeeds. The last character I want to talk about, and I just want to talk about the actor, is Akira Takarada as the Secretary General. In our Godzilla Nation chat, Chopper Pilot 5 and I went on a small rant where we talked about how awesome Akira Takarada is in this movie by carrying 2 laser pistols and being called Mr. Bullseye in college. He is just a badass in this film. He doesn't have a lot of screen time as himself, in that there's a good chunk of the story where he's under control, well, where he is an Exilian and he's not playing himself. But otherwise, he's a really likable and cool and badass character, just like the rest of the cast. I just wanted to bring him up because, you know, Akira Takarada played Ogata in the original Gojira, and I find it interesting and definitely not an accident that he's in this film, which is supposed to be the end of the Godzilla franchise. So I find it both interesting and commendable that he's in this film and is so cool in this movie and is such an integral part of the plot, being the leader of the known world. So I like that aspect about it. Aside from that, though, again, I can basically sum up the human cast of Godzilla Final Wars as all likable badasses, so not much more to say about them beyond that. I guess I'll talk about the Exilians briefly, since they're not humans, but I wouldn't count them as monsters. The Exilians are alright. They're a good reference, of course, to the people of the Planet X from the Invasion of the Astro Monster. And they're a good kind of sort of mix of the people of the Planet X and the Kilax. But and I never was a big fan of the Kilax. I always thought they were a little bit underdeveloped. And the Exilians are as well, though not as bad. We get to know them quite a bit throughout the film because they have a lot of screen time. My only problem with the Exilians is that they don't really come off like aliens. They kind of come off like monotone and eccentric people. And I suppose I shouldn't be nitpicking Godzilla Final Wars for its interpretation of extraterrestrials, but it's a little strange. And to hear the Exilian, the younger Exilian guy call Godzilla dude, it's a little surreal and not something I would imagine an alien to say. So I do, I like the Exilians. They're just not entirely, well, they're not entirely original, but that's not a problem because they're homage. But they're not entirely consistent in that they're very, very goofy. And I do love the younger Exilian. He's very, very eccentric, and I like that. And he's a very, very over-the-top villain. I mean, he dances around his main, control room of his ship constantly, and basically screams his head off whenever Godzilla kills something. So, it's quite, he's quite over the top, and I like him for that. So, he's fine, just, again, the Exilians are a little bit inconsistent. So, I do like them, I just wish that they were a little more consistent and made a little bit more sense. But not much beyond that. And again, I wish that their goals were a little bit more explained and less convoluted. I'm not sure what they wish to accomplish by anything. That's my problem with them. I don't know why they controlled our leaders. I don't know why they wiped out our civilization when they want to use us like cattle. So they're a little confusing and a little convoluted, but at the end of the day, they are badasses and are over-the-top villains, so can't really complain too much. So that'll bring us into the monsters. There are a lot of them. I didn't do a head count in Godzilla Final Wars, but there are a lot of them. And I don't want to talk about them individually because, for one, again, there are a lot of them, and two, most of them are under mind control for the entire duration of the film. So to talk about them would kind of like be talking about and analyzing machine guns. So I'll only talk about the ones that I think are integral to the plot and the ones I want to talk about. We might as well start with Godzilla. You know what? No, we're not. We're gonna leave him for last. This is my last analysis of Godzilla's character, and we'll leave him for last. Let's start with Gigan. This is my favorite version of Gigan because that design is awesome. So cool looking, very robotic looking, extremely badass looking, and he gets fucking chainsaws at the end of the movie, so don't you dare complain. He's just a badass in this movie. This is easily my favorite appearance of him. He does nothing but badass things. He gets killed twice, which is slightly disappointing, and both times he gets his head taken off, but he is a badass. It's a very badass redesign, and one that I really like, and I just really like Gigan in this movie. It's probably my favorite appearance by him, and definitely his best Godzilla movie. The only other monster I really want to talk about specifically... No, two others. One, let's talk about Kaiser Ghidorah and Monster X. Monster X is a badass, has a badass design, and kind of is a good foil for Godzilla because he's got a similar body structure. I'm assuming that was on purpose, and though you can definitely see Ghidorah in him, he does have a body similar to Godzilla, and I like the way they fight together. So, despite being a primary version of Kaiser Ghidorah, I think the fact that he has a body type similar to Godzilla works and looks great. Kaiser Ghidorah's design is just fucking amazing. That thing is just crazy. He's got 4 legs. He's got 2 tails, 3 heads, a weird-looking, BA-looking dragon face with, like, frills. It's just so cool-looking. And I also like the intricate detail of the middle head having the biggest horns on it, and the two side heads having smaller horns and smaller necks. So I like that intricate detail, and it's, again, I really like it. It's hard to go into detail about these monsters because they're mostly just there to be homages and be badasses, and Kaiser Ghidorah does not fail to entertain that notion. He's extremely badass. He causes a lot of destruction, and, well, no, he doesn't, but he's very badass, and he's a worthy final opponent for Godzilla. And like everyone seems to think, he's a good final opponent for Godzilla because he's Godzilla's archenemy. So again, I really like this version of Ghidorah. His fight with Godzilla is great. He doesn't have a ton of screen time, which is slightly disappointing, again, unless we're counting him in with Monster X, though I consider them two different monsters. Overall, it's just a badass redesign. Before we get into Godzilla, the last monster I want to talk about is Mothra. And the only thing I have to say about her is that she's fucking pointless. I don't want to talk about her character, I don't want to talk about her characterization, nothing. I just want to talk about how pointless she is in the story. She has an interesting rivalry with Gigan that's set up in the first 30 minutes. With the Infinite Islanders teleporting Ozaki, to become romantic interest Miyuki, and Kenji Sahara to a cave on Infinite Island, which has cave paintings that tell of an ancient struggle between Mothra and Gigan, and that the Exilians sent Gigan to Earth a millennia ago. And the idea is supposed to be that Gigan was the first mutant, and that Gigan created that subspecies of the Exilians on Earth, which became the mutant humans. The thing is that, despite that early on set-up rivalry between Mothra and Gigan, they have one 5-minute fight towards the end, and Mothra is only in about 11 minutes of the movie. This is not only extremely disappointing, but she doesn't do anything aside from kill Gigan, but Godzilla already did that, so she's entirely pointless in the narrative. Only seems to be there because it's the final Godzilla movie. You must have Mothra in it, and again, that's very, very disappointing. So Mothra is very superfluous in the story. Once she dies, there's no impact of her, so she's just very disappointing, entirely pointless in the narrative, and I don't like that. So let's get into the final monster. Let's talk about Godzilla for the final time. So this version of Godzilla is for the most part in line with his basic Millennium series characterization of the badass destroyer. It's not much different than the Tokyo SOS and Against Mechagodzilla characterization. He's mostly just there to blow stuff up, though he's not as bland as the Against Mechagodzilla Tokyo SOS characterization, in that he has quite a strong badass characterization, kind of like versus Mechagodzilla 2, and I really like his characterization. He comes off as a very, very strong badass, one that you don't want to mess with, and he's just extremely badass in this movie, and once you see him, you're just like, yeah, Godzilla! And overall, his characterization, while slightly simple, is quite strong as a badass version of Godzilla. I really, really like the design. It's kind of a slimmed down version of the 2000 suit, with smaller spines. And the thing I really like about it is that it comes off a little bit as a tribute to the Showa series design. He looks kind of like the, a little bit in posture in the way he looks into the 64 Godzilla suit, though he has a different head. And I really, really like the suit for that. And for the most part, I feel like it has to be this slimmed down because Godzilla's doing things like, you know, extreme aerial martial arts in this film that he wouldn't be able to do if he had a bulky design. Not that that stopped the people of Godzilla vs. Megagearus, but anyway, we already talked about that film. So I really like this redesign of Godzilla. I love the head. The face on the thing is extremely mean and intimidating, and the eyes are great. They've got this great overcast, which is a thing I like on a lot of my Godzilla designs. It's one of the things I like about the Biollante suit, in that you can't see his eyes, though they're there, and they kind of just look like dark shadows. But the cool thing about this Godzilla design is that whenever there's an explosion, his eyes light up with fire, so it's so cool. And again, it's a design choice that I always like in my Godzilla suits. So I really like both Godzilla's characterization and his design. Again, my only problem with Godzilla in this film is that he doesn't have much place in the overall story, and that's again very, very disappointing for this being his last movie. Really the best point of him in the film is the ending. Well, 2 points. One is where an elderly hunter who has apparently been around since the birth of Godzilla was says to his grandson that Godzilla hates humanity because one time man made a huge fire that angered Godzilla. Again, he's kind of giving a child's version of the H-bomb tests and the birth of Godzilla and Godzilla's need to seek revenge on humanity. And he says that Godzilla can never forgive humanity for what they did to him. That's really great to incorporate into the final Godzilla film because it really simply and eloquently states the entire point of Godzilla. It's not developed in any way. Well, it kind of is, but it's not the center point, which is slightly disappointing, though it is a great scene. And it gets a great cap off at the end with the grandfather being in Tokyo when Godzilla, right after Godzilla kills Kaiser Ghidorah, and when Minya stops him from killing the human cast. And he screams up at Godzilla, "Godzilla, you must forgive." It's a great moment at the end of the film. It's a great cap off to Godzilla in that he doesn't die. And it's a much more optimistic ending than Destroya's ending in that man has kind of finally redeemed itself by going back to its, going back to being a small civilization, and Godzilla doesn't really have any reason to destroy them anymore. And that he must forgive them because if he doesn't forgive them, Earth will be gone forever. So I really like the ending of this film. I think it's a great cap off to the Godzilla character and a strong ending for the franchise. So I really like the ending. And I think that it's a good cap off of Godzilla's character. Aside from that though, the monsters of this film are badass, and it's cool to see a lot of them again. Like it's been a long time since we've seen Anguirus, and he's in this film. It's been a long time since we've seen Gigan and Ebera and King Caesar. It's all great to see them again, and they're all great. They all have, for the most part, well done redesigns and cool badass scenes. But they're all just under mind control the entire film, so they don't get much characterization. So they're mostly all just badass big guns. So they're all cool, but they're all under mind control. I can't really talk about their characters. So that'll bring us into the effects. You can tell this is the Godzilla film with the highest budget because, oh my god, the effects are just amazing. The suit work is all fantastic and seamless. The CGI is easily the best of the entire Godzilla franchise. Everything just looks amazing. The sets are elaborate. The lighting is great. The video quality is great. Everything about the way this movie looks is great. The suit work is seamless. There's a great integration of human and Godzilla footage, monster footage in general. And overall, all the fight choreography is great. All the laser effects and the ship battles are great. Just everything about the effects of this film are fantastic, seamless, and epic. So I really don't want to talk too much about the effects because overall they're just awesome and are one of the things that carries the movie and makes it such a treat for a Godzilla fan to watch. Because it's just cool to see all these classic monsters with modern suits and to see all these people beating the shit out of each other parallel with Godzilla fights. So it's all great and the effects are fantastic. The last thing I want to say about Godzilla Final Wars is that I want to talk about the music score. There's not many Godzilla fans out there who like the music score because a lot of people's biggest complaint is that there's not a lot of Akira Ifukube music in here. And I can understand that. I agree. Though at the beginning of the film you do hear the classic Godzilla, beat. Dun 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 da 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 da, which is cool. But overall, I did miss his score, and I wish that it would have been used in more places, like when Godzilla bursts out of the ice, I thought it would have been appropriate. But Keith Emerson's score is absolutely fantastic. Very dramatic, very apocalyptic, extremely energetic, and epic. The ending credits soundtrack of this film, absolutely epic. Truly feels like the ending of a franchise and the end of a legacy, and it's badass and emotional. And the beginning of this film with the apocalyptic roll of the credits and the fire and the kind of techno reworking of Godzilla's theme by Keith Emerson, it's all great and is well done. So overall, I absolutely love the music. I think it perfectly fits the movie. I know I wanted more of Ifukube stuff to be in here as well. I do miss it. I don't think it's as big of a problem as people crack it up to be, but I do think it is kind of a problem in that this is supposed to be Godzilla's last movie, so You know, you kind of want his main composer's music to be in there. So I did find that slightly disappointing, but overall I love Keith Emerson's score. I think it's very, very well done. So all in all, I absolutely love the music score, especially the final end credits roll score. It's one of my favorite scores in Godzilla history. So that'll about do it for our review of the final Godzilla film, Godzilla Final Wars. All in all, it's for the most part a fantastic, well done conclusion to the legacy of Godzilla. It's extremely respectful and entertaining in its homage and action sequences that all pay tribute and are traditional to the legacy of Godzilla. The monster fights are fantastic and some stuff we've never seen before. The human fight scenes, while slightly jarring to see in a Godzilla film, are at the end of the day very entertaining and on par, if not better, than some action scenes done here in America. And overall, the film is just extremely entertaining. This isn't a problem, this is just a warning. If you're not a Godzilla fan, don't watch this. This is for Godzilla fans. And if you're not one, you're not going to appreciate it on any level other than maybe the human action sequences, because they are very well done. But aside from that, there's nothing here for you. For the most part, the plot is just there to set up homage and tribute and action sequences that are fitting to the end of Godzilla. And because of that, it's not a good movie to introduce people to Godzilla, and not a good movie for people who aren't Godzilla fans. But if you are a Godzilla fan, watch this movie. It's extremely entertaining, badass, and just a ball of entertainment thrown at your face that you just have to soak up and enjoy. Watch Godzilla Final Wars. It's a fantastic it's a fantastic Godzilla movie. I just wish that he had more of a place in the story. That's ultimately my biggest problem with the film. And if he had more of a place in the story, I would probably give it a 5 out of 5. But because of that, and that means that it's not as successful as it could be at being the end of Godzilla, though everything else about it is perfect for doing that, I have to give Godzilla Final Wars a 4 out of 5. Watch it if you're a Godzilla fan. It's just that I think that if it's trying to do that, trying to pay tribute to the legacy of Godzilla and be the final film, I feel like he should indeed be the focal point of the story, which he's not. So that's slightly disappointing. But aside from that, fantastic movie. Watch it. I highly recommend it. And for the most part, it's a great conclusion to the Godzilla franchise. So 4 out of 5. Watch it. And thus, we end the story of Godzilla. That strangely tragic and relatable monster, who is the product of our own selfish need for advancement and control over nature, who showed us that no matter how advanced we become, nature will always be there to keep us in check. And that's where he comes in. But despite that, when the chips are down and the Earth is in danger, he'll put aside his dispute with us and stand on the side of Earth. Thank you very much for joining me on Godzilla Palooza. And though we end this history of the Big G, like all history, a future must follow. As long as man continues to make mistakes, there must always be something there to put him back in his place. And for that, we look to Legendary Pictures in 2014. Thank you very much for joining me on Godzilla Palooza. I am Zazubaar, and sayonara.